Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tank12. Either call me, I don't really care. And welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today reviewing the VZ55. This is the newest addition to all of the tier 10 tanks that we already have in the game, and this vehicle is for the Czechoslovakian tech tree. And you can see it's in here with the VZ44, TNH 105, and the TNH VZ51. We did review the TNH VZ51, and I did play that vehicle again, or a lot more now with the magazine loading system, with the auto loading system. And this time around with this vehicle, I've played a lot of games with the standard single shot 130mm gun and the auto loading cannon that you can also unlock, and I would highly advise trying out for yourself if you go for this tank, if there is any interest. Now, this is a very special kind of tier 10 heavy tank because it's not really anymore, it's not the traditional heavy tanks that we kind of know and love. It goes more towards the direction of what the 113 and the Object 277 and the 260 and even the IS-7 kind of represent, and that's the extremely fast heavy tank with the kind of the armor of a heavy vehicle, but with the flexibility and the mobility of a medium tank. And I think that makes it quite interesting for a lot of players, and it basically kind of goes directly into the kind of meta that we have in World of Tanks at the moment. That is, you need to have some armor, you need to have a really good gun or decent DPM, and you need to be fast, because if you're not fast enough, you're not going to be able to partake in those really fast and engaging battles at one part of the map, and then be able to run over to the other part and maybe get even more damage or fall back to be able to farm even more damage. So basically, the entire meta of this game is now just, running from one place, overwhelming that side, and then running to the other place, or falling back. But armor, speed, and firepower are extremely important there, and that's basically where the VZ55 comes right in. So let's first take a look at the gun that we have, the with the auto loading gun, and then we have the standard single shot gun, and I just want to compare these real fast. Both of the exact same alpha damage, so 490, 640 with the high explosive shell, but the high explosive shell only has 68 millimeters of pen, and the shell velocity is also pretty shocking, 863 meters per second. But the standard AP shell has a shell velocity of 980, which is okay, and the premium shell here is an APCR round with the shell velocity of 1125. Now, the pen on this vehicle with 260, that's basically the kind of standard shell pen that you have at tier 10 nowadays. I think some of the heavy tanks have all, I think, like 250. The E100 has 248, if I'm not mistaken. 246, I was not that far off. But either way, you can see it's about the average right there. The rate of fire on the single shotgun is 5.36 rounds per minute. That is a bit better than with the auto-loading gun, but we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the auto-loading system and the single-shot system in just a second. Now, you can see that the gun traverse isn't really as impressive since it is a heavy tank. It cannot have the best turret traverse, so the turret traverse is also kind of, impacted with that. You have 27.26 degrees per second, so that takes a bit of time to get your gun on target if someone is trying to circle you or on your left. You do have 8 degrees of gun depression, which is really nice, especially on a heavy tank. Your tank is quite low. I think the profile isn't as big, so I think you can really work certain ridge lines. 8 degrees is kind of the average now, but still it's great to see that you have 8 degrees of gun depression. That it's going to make a lot of things easier. The aim time with the single shotgun and the auto loading gun is 2.48 or 2.3, and that's actually quite decent, I think, for having that burst potential or having that damage output. I think that 2.48, that's I think you cannot really complain about that at all. That's going to be working really nicely for you. The dispersion isn't actually too bad either, 0.35. I think it's about on par with the IS-7, maybe a bit better than the IS-7, 0.37 right there. But I think like it's quite crazy. The gun handling on this vehicle is really good in my opinion, since you will be playing this as a bit of a breakthrough tank, as they are suggesting the title of this vehicle. It is a tank where you really do rush to a certain position and you play extremely aggressive up in the face of your enemy, and having that burst potential is really nasty with the double gun or with the auto-loading gun. That auto-loading gun really, like, in 20 seconds you do about 900 or 1,000 damage. That is crazy. Just think about that. There's a tier A vehicle over there. It has 1,400 HP or 1,300, and you basically just annihilated it almost completely, and it's limping away with 300 HP. And in another 20 seconds, you're just going to finish him off, and you're going to be looking down the drain because you've kind of wasted 200 additional damage that you could have done on another vehicle. So yeah, the VZ55 has some really crazy potential on the damage, and especially with that auto-loading gun, it's extremely dangerous up close and a very, very uncomfortable vehicle to go up against, because the intra-clip reload is only 2 seconds, and that is really crazy for, you know, a 490 punch in the face. You just have to wait 2 seconds. That makes a huge difference. Now, if I look at the AMX 50B, for example, the AMX 50B has 2.5 seconds intra-clip reload, and that itself is pretty nasty. I think the AMX 5120 had like 3 seconds. That takes time, and you don't have any armor. You can't just sit out there. You know, every single shot you take is a risk that you will get penetrated once or twice by enemy that's shooting at you. And with the armor layout that you have with the WZ 55 VZ 55, it's actually going to be quite interesting, because your HP, now I'm using equipment for additional HP, your HP is going to be something along the lines of 2,200, and this is really going to be working in your favor. Like, I know the HP is not the best for a heavy tank. It's on the low side, kind of. It's like on the T110E5 level, but with the hull armor that you have, and with the turret armor especially, it's going to be a really nasty kind of vehicle for close range engagements. The hull armor isn't the best. Like, you have 115 at the front, 90 on the side, and 85 on the rear. Anyone shooting at you from the side is going to deal massive amounts of damage because you don't really have any spaced armor. The front is angled in a really uncomfortable way that if you just wiggle a little bit around, there are going to be quite a few rounds that will bounce depending on what tier you're going up against. When you're playing against tier 9s and tier 8s, your hull armor is going to be working quite nicely probably. Against tier 10 tanks, that 115 is not going to be able to sustain a lot of shells. But still, if you can keep that covered just a little bit, especially with those angles that you have, and you don't just, you know, play completely without any regard for your safety, you can survive a lot of shells, especially with this kind of turret. 300 millimeters at the front, 150 on the side, 90 on the rear. No real evident weak spots except for maybe this cupola, which is not the biggest. I think you can hit it maybe if you're close enough, but if someone is wiggling back and forth, it's going to be quite difficult. And especially because of the burst damage, I don't think people will want to be sticking in front of someone with that kind of 130 millimeter dong slapping you back to the garage very, very quickly. Now, with the mobility, you have a tank that weighs about 62 tons on max. You actually have 914 horsepower on your engine. The power to weight ratio is not the best with 16.53, but obviously you can add a turbocharger on it to make it go even a bit faster. So I've decided to get a turbocharger on this vehicle. So I have 54 kilometers per hour top speed, 36.53 degrees per second turn time. The 17 kilometers per hour backwards reverse speed is not going to be working in your favor, but I think you can buff that as well. There's a field modification that you can go for. I think I just have to check real fast. Where is it? I think there's a field modification that you can go with at the end or at tier 6 where you can probably pick mobility as well. But I'm not really sure if it's on the heavy tanks, the mobility perk, or if it's maybe just on the light tanks. But still, you can specialize this tank even more. So from the sets, from the get-go, you get a tank that is really powerful, that has a extraordinarily good gun, 2 guns that you can choose from. One that does 1,000 burst damage if you fire 2 rounds very quickly. And then you have a platform that is very mobile and has decent enough protection to not get annihilated completely if you make a mistake. So basically, it's a much better tank than, let's say, the AMX 50B, which is a huge thing, but just doesn't really it just doesn't really have the any of those real assets anymore that maybe the VZ55 has. If you look at the AMX 50B, the burst or the total damage that you have with a single clip is about what? Let's count it out. You have 4 rounds. That's 1,600 damage on average. Like, you have 30-second reload time. In 20 seconds, I push out about 1,000k or 1k damage, and I'm definitely not going to be hurting as much as the AMX 50B. And the AMX 50B has even less HP, which is ridiculous if you think about it. This is a huge target. It's massive. It has no armor, and it doesn't have any of those benefits that the VZ55 has, except for maybe it's a bit faster by 10 kilometers per hour. Yes, it certainly has its place, but the VZ55 just can't go up in your face and do the things that the AMX 50B would love to do. I mean, the AMX 50B is I have the feeling it's a very situational kind of vehicle. With the VZ55, I think you are going to be able to just survive a lot of things that you should not be able to survive because of all of those characteristics that are decent or great in terms of mobility or in terms of survivability and firepower. Either way, I'd say let's jump into 1 or 2 matches, take a look at what this vehicle is capable of, how you can maybe deal with it, and what the limits are with the VZ55. Okay, so I think we only really need to take a look at one gameplay in the VZ55. We might just have a little excerpt where we can take a look at how the armor might hold up when you're going up against a couple of tier 10 vehicles. But right now, this is an ideal matchup that you can have against a couple tier 8s, a few tier 9s, and just about 4 tier 10s. And I think this really is going to show you what you're capable of with that extreme burst potential that you have on this vehicle. 20 seconds of reload time for about 1,000 damage, that is pretty damn impressive. I don't think that there's a tank out there that can do that kind of burst potential or burst damage in a very quick succession. Right there, drive-by, we hit the VZ55, but we also get caught with the second shot. What I've noticed is that a lot of players in the VZ55 do play with only APCR shells, with only the premium ones. Those do not have crazy amounts of pen. 306mm for a premium shell at tier 10 is not a lot, to be fair, but still, it's going to improve your penetration chance by about 40mm. To be fair, I don't really think it's worth it. I think you can really work with the AP shells at tier 10. You do have a bit of a more challenge, but as long as you do know the weak spots, I think you're going to be able to work with that. And if you need 304mm of pen, you obviously can switch over to APCR shells. The reload time is not something that takes extremely long. I think the only vehicle that comes to mind that is really similar with that kind of potential, that damage potential, is I think the Kranvang, which has like 18 seconds reload time with 3 rounds and doing I think 1,300 damage. That's pretty impressive. Now you can see how disgusting this thing can be. Basically, the VZ55, he does shoot that Yak Tiger. The Yak Tiger was a bit aggressive, going out on a limb right here and getting shot by the VZ55 twice. Doesn't take a very long time. You can see that intra-clip reload of 2 seconds, and we knock him down to only, I think, 50 HP or something like that. We deal 1,000 damage with those 2 rounds, about 1,040 damage very, very quickly, and that's really disgusting. Now, obviously, the VZ55 does have quite a few weak spots, and that is its hull. Its hull is not extremely well armored, 150 millimeters, as I mentioned prior. It might bounce with the angle that you have, but the lower plate here is quite prominent. It's very big. You also have like quite a bit. Your turret is not extremely far up front, but it's also not extremely far in the middle. So it kind of allows you to still, you know, hit that tank quite reliably in the tracks. But you know, if those shots come in and they are in a hurry because they're being put under pressure from several sides, well, you do get bounces left, right, and center. Could be that that player just didn't really know where to shoot the VZ55. I know that the TheFrXion K is not the best tier 9 vehicle, since it's also the very first tier 9 fully fledged premium tank that they've added into the game, but he bounced twice off our hull. Now this E50M is going to get punished. You can see the rate, the time it takes to fully aim in. It is 2.48 seconds to get a fully aimed in reticle without any real equipment and with brothers in arms and maybe some other consumables. I think you can work with that in medium to close ranges, but if you have to go up against targets that are further down the line, it's going to be a bit more difficult. But once again, punishing that E50 for almost 1,000 with 2 rounds while he wasn't paying attention to us. Then he bounced with a standard APCR shell. And this is just, I mean, just think about this. Like, you're running around. These tanks don't have any choice. They don't have any real chance of dealing with you if you're coming around and you're flanking them. Now, obviously, that can happen in any other vehicle. And so that's not something that's just for the VZ55. But when you come around and you like have the opportunity to shoot at the guys, the 2-second intra-clip reload, you are in there so fast and you can punish them really, really quickly. And it's going to hurt your opponents and it's going to hurt them really, really bad. As you can see, that E75, we basically just tore him a new one with 3 rounds, finished him off. And there is the TheFrXion K. I'm waiting in, and then we have a pretty bad low roll, but still 373. That's something you do in a T110E5, and a T110E5 has a pretty long reload if you think about it right now, because like the power creep in world tanks has become incredible. Still, I think you can fight this vehicle and you can effectively engage it, because this is still a tier 10. It's going to meet other tier 10 vehicles. And at tier 10, that armor that I mentioned prior is not going to be as effective as it is against those tier 9 vehicles and other tier 8 vehicles. The thing is, the VZ55 is still a rather new tank. Maybe new players that haven't played tier 10 have not witnessed the power and destruction of the VZ55. Now, if they come into tier 10, they might see this guy and they might still first bounce the vehicle, because that upper plate, because of the angle, it does kind of invite you to bounce. You have to be extremely cautious. I wouldn't say you have to be, well, if you're out in front of the VZ55, you have to be extremely cautious. Yes, that is definitely true. But at the same time, what you have to do is you have to take the time to aim for the lower plate, or you need to have the right angle to shoot the upper plate, because if you're right in front of this tank, The upper plate with 150 millimeters is maybe not extremely thick, but the angling is done in a manner that just makes it really, really difficult to go through there if you don't have enough pen and maybe not the right shell type. So that is something you have to keep in mind when you go up against this tank. If you have the side or something like that, because it's really thinly armored, you're not going to have an issue going through. But the upper plate at the front is a bit of a troll, and the turret definitely is extremely well armored. The thing is, the burst potential that you have in this tank, having the opportunity, the ability to do 1,000 damage in a very quick succession, is something that makes a lot of people extremely careful and cautious around you, and that makes them kind of panic when you're in front of them, because they might hit you for maybe max 900 damage if it's I don't know, a tank destroyer, or maybe the Jagdpanzer U100 hits you for 1,000, and you basically two-shot him for 1,000 as well, and that Jagdpanzer is going to reload longer than you will, and then you are going to hit him for another 1,000. So, you know, if you think about it, that's pretty mad. The only thing that can really, like, where you have to have a lot of respect for, that is really in front of you, is something that maybe you cannot penetrate, or something that is going to do massive amounts of damage if they pen you. Might be the FV, the British tier 10 tank destroyers. If those guys get in front of you and they punch one into you, but they still have a longer reload time than you. So that burst potential, those 2 rounds are so dangerous, and it doesn't really make you or give you any incentive to jump back into the single shotgun, because why would you give up that burst potential, that damage potential, doing that kind of damage in a really quick succession? But I would say we go into a tier 10 matchup real fast, see what this tank can do and where its limitations are, and how well the armor can hold up against those tier 10 tanks, because obviously, keep in mind, we're going up against tier 10 tanks that are slinging gold shells, and that is a whole different story. So you might need to improvise and adapt your playstyle, because in this match right here, I didn't give a flying fuck what I was doing. I didn't care how aggressive I could be as aggressive as I wanted to be, and I still ended up with 5,211 damage. And I didn't really, it didn't take me to be a mastermind to get to that damage, because it was really, really simple. I just waited when the enemies were kind of occupied, and then I came in, swooped in, 2 shots, then I waited 20 seconds, another 2 shots, and the damage stacks up very quickly. So let's jump on to the other gameplay and see how well this tank does against only tier 10 opponents, and where its limitations are. So this is not going to be a full gameplay, but it's going to show you the limitations of the VZ55. You can see we're playing on Studzianski, and this map has a pretty banger of a soundtrack, and we're only playing against tier 10 vehicles. You can see we're going up against everything that there is. The only thing that's missing is the Object 279E, but obviously we weren't asking for tier 11, so I think that's all good. But when you're playing Studzianski, you have several places to go. You can obviously go to the north, where a lot of the medium tanks go to. You can fight it out in that little factory as a heavy tank. But since we are quite mobile and we do have a bit of armor, I decided to go down to this little town, or I don't even know, a village, because the VZ55 obviously has quite nice mobility. I should have pointed that out sooner. 54 kilometers per hour top speed. Although you don't have the best acceleration, you still have the mobility of a medium tank, and that is quite fascinating, if you ask me. But immediately you can notice that first we were spotted when we were in the cap. That means that they have a light tank right over there, and it took me a bit of time to get into position. And then the second thing is that they have already pushed extremely aggressively into this little gorge, into that little valley, and that makes us here very vulnerable to several different attacks. Now they can be over there. We don't have artillery, so that's very important. They can push in from here. We can have a crossfire from there, but they have the aggressive advantage right there in this moment in time. So right there, we get hit by the VZ into, I think, the lower part, like that angle right here. And it's a bit awkward for us to fight this battle with that VZ55 because he doesn't have any real weak spots on top except for that cupola. But if he keeps on moving, it's extremely difficult to get one of those shots in there. And since that accuracy that we have with 0.34 is not going to make us pinpoint accurate, well, we're not going to be able to hit him. But right there, that's something that can and will happen when you're playing this tank. I get hit by a Manticore, and that one hurt. 415 damage. I get hit by the SD2 because I make a very dumb play by sticking myself out there trying to maybe get a shot off at the Manticore. But you can see that the tank, especially the armor at tier 10, well, you are going to need all the HP that you can get if you're not in the pushing role. Especially if you're pushing, you're going to need even more HP. But it's really difficult to fight back because this tank is rather long. It's a quite long vehicle. It has a large profile if you look at it from the side. And because the enemy is doing such a good job, we aren't really very effective right here. But 0.34 is not horrible accuracy. It's not as bad as some Soviet tanks. So we do punish that batch at 25T right there. And that was pretty nasty. 900 damage. We could have done more. If he had more HP, he would have done more, definitely. But yeah, the VZ55 kind of comes to its limits when it is up against several opponents. Well, who could have guessed? Every single tank is coming up to its limits when it's going up against several opponents. And also when those opponents are quite heavily armored. We get lucky that 60 TP does not hit us. I'm desperately trying to help that IS-7 who is in a very aggressive position. And yeah, once more, we're unable to penetrate the ST2. We make a huge mistake once more being out in the open. Our side armor is just way too thin. We can't really do anything. It's very stupid for us to push out there like that. So we're trying to side scrape now, get a little bit back. It's not worth, peeking that IS-7. We can't help him anymore. And we put one into the SP1 and we put another one into him. That's where the beauty of this tank comes in. And we get punished also by the VZ55, who must have moved over there, and we cannot spot him, unfortunately. But he does put another shot into us. A very, very nasty one, that is. So, yeah, obviously the armor on this thing is not the greatest. It's not going to be saving you at all against those tier 10s, especially if you're doing like horrible things as I'm doing right here, where I'm just peeking out with the side, but there's no real rubble where I can hide my tank behind. So right now we're in a very awkward position. I'm waiting for this Kranwagen to move in. With the high alpha that we have, we knock him out, and now we're kind of trying to get this ST2. I'm still debating over should I reload or not, because it's really awkward being in a position where you don't know if you should reload or not, because you only have 2 shells. But I do decide to reload just in case that someone is coming around the corner. But the VZ55 kind of got an angle at me, so he must be over there. And I think this Stritzwagen cannot spot him because there is a building in the way. And he manages to hit our lower plate there and knocks us out. So yeah, you have 2,310 HP if you have the upgraded equipment. And you have to think about 2,100 HP if you do not have that equipment. Now, that is not massive amounts of HP, but you can obviously make it work because there are other tier 10 heavy tanks that have about the same, such as the Kranwagen or the T125. I think that was 2,200, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, you have to be very, very conscious that you don't have a lot of armor. And if you're not one of those tanks that is in a push, you're going to be looking down the drain a little bit. Because when they're pushing you, you have those 2 rounds, yes. Your armor is not going to hold up very long, though, if there are several tanks coming in. It's going to hurt very, very much. And they're going to be firing APCR or heat shells. As you can see, the majority of the shells that landed on us were premium shells. and I think every single premium shell there landed and did damage. Now, this tank doesn't have heat shells. The pen that you have with those premium shells with the APCR are only 306. Now I'm saying only 306 because other premium shells do have sometimes double, not double, but 360 millimeters of pen, or 350 with heat shells. Now, you're not having heat shells, you're having APCR shells. Now those are maybe not as useful as heat shells in certain scenarios. Now heat shells have their own drawbacks, but I think that is going to make it a bit more difficult because you don't have the best flexibility. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the VZ55 is a really powerful vehicle. It's a really strong tank, and it kind of makes me sad that Wargaming needs to go one step above every single time they release a vehicle, because now we have tanks that do burst damage with 2 rounds that is up to 1,000 or even more. And like, where does it end? Do we get the next vehicle for the Italians? I don't even know, the Italian tank destroyers. They're coming out with 2 rounds that do like 750 alpha, and their intraclip reload is 1.5 seconds. Because I mean, it's kind of going into really crazy dimensions here. Tier 10, you can now, by this point, because we have so many tier 10s, you can now already categorize it into tier 10, 11, and sometimes even 12 if you want to go really, really harsh into something, into some tanks. And I just think that the VZ55, it's a lot of fun. Yes, I love playing this tank. I think that burst potential is so funny. It's crazy when you like put 2 shells into someone. But is it something that the game really needed? Is this tank really necessary for World Tanks? Another vehicle that is just running around, has decent enough armor but great mobility of a medium tank, firepower of some kind of tank destroyer. I don't even know. But yeah, I'm gonna give you guys my verdict now. I think this tank is a lot of fun, especially if you like faster heavy tanks, if you like mobility, if you value a really, I think this is a really, what do you call it? I just forgot the word. Reliable gun. I think most of the part is very reliable. The gun handling is pretty damn good. Well, I think it's decent enough. If you want to increase maybe the or decrease the aim time, increase the accuracy, you can do that with equipment and everything. Yeah, it certainly is one of those tanks that is just going to be the new meta, and it's going to be definitely a meta tank. And I think we're going to see this in Clan Wars probably as well. The only thing that it doesn't really have is that flexibility with the premium shells. If it would have had heat shells, I think everyone in the World of Tanks Cosmos would have just cried out in utter shock. But yes, it's kind of balanced at tier 10 with the armor a little bit if you go up against other tier 10 vehicles, because the armor is not the thickest, at least for the hull. But as soon as you're in a hull down position, it becomes quite a trollish vehicle once more. And because of that burst damage, nobody really wants to sit in front of you. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this review. To be fair, I've enjoyed the Czechoslovakian heavy tank line. That doesn't mean that I have to say, or I have to feel like that the Czechoslovakian heavy tank line is a good line for the game. I think that the tier 7, the tier 8 all are decent. They're not extremely overpowered or too good. The tier 9 already starts going into that kind of direction of the tier 10, and then the tier 10 is kind of a new playing field where you can really obliterate your enemies very quickly, especially if they don't really pay too much attention to you. And I think in the hands of a very good player, this can be a very deadly tool. Yeah, so that was it for today's video. I hope I see you guys soon. Until then, have a good one. Peace out.